Good morning, friends. Welcome to OBE Journal 2017, uh, number 26, I believe. As we explore our greater consciousness, our expansion with curiosity conducted outside the body, we lose our old definitions and understandings of who we are and what we're about. Slowly, we begin to see that we are not what we thought we were. We are not members of a family, citizens of a country, employees of a company. Those definitions are temporary and limiting if you hold to them dearly. We are much greater than any of those definitions, although each one of them is legally applicable, let's put it that way. The sort of laws of our society sort of dictate that we perform the functions within those definitions. And mostly we cooperate with that expectation. And as you continue to explore, I certainly wouldn't suggest that you cease cooperating with those expectations. The smooth functioning of society depends on that sort of a thing. And creating discord and conflict because you now disagree with your earlier definitions of yourself will create far more problems than it's worth. So certainly I don't advise you to do that. Although people who get a revelation of especially a new religion, it will often throw up their lives, their families, their citizenship to join this. And we're all familiar with sects and cults and how they disturb the peaceful orderly sort of progression of society. And I needn't mention any names, but they are disturbing. I mean, they teach lessons to people. Their souls learn the foolishness of doing such things, but it may be a 20-year lesson. And for those who have come out of cults and written about it, it often is a 20, 25, 30-year lesson. But there are other situations in society where the lesson does take that long to learn. People in the military often feel that way. After a certain amount of time, maybe not as much as 30 years, probably 10, 15. People within the corporate structure who have worked their way up a corporate structure in the belief that it is, good for them and good for society. often become disenchanted after a certain time. And when they realize how things are actually done and the motives for doing them, and the sort of callous ruthlessness of it all. But anyway, that's maybe a side issue. But expanding definitions. I'd like to pursue that a little more. Looking at ourselves right now, in this very moment of time, whenever you tune into this particular broadcast, who you think you are now is a very temporary definition. Even if you've expanded it from, 3-5 years ago, yes, you are a certain gender. Yes, you are a certain ethnicity. Yes, you are somewhat defined by the culture that you are part of, and your basic humanity, as we might call it. And when you're initially conscious out of body, you will still be feeling, human. You will look human, mostly, and you will act in a human fashion. Your curiosity will be shaped, maybe not dictated, but shaped by your human experience so far. And will continue to be so for quite some time. I know many people at this point, from what I've read and communications I've had with people, suggest that they have experienced themselves as an orb. They've seen orbs and then seen themselves look and act like an orb. So there's a new definition right there. And those who perceive orbs on a sort of a regular basis will struggle with new definitions of form and function. And on one level, it's, it can be fairly casual, like, oh yeah, I'm an orb. And perhaps it's casual because we have an underlying knowledge of such that isn't conscious, but when it does become conscious, there's a recognition of a deeper reality. And that's sort of what I'm going to talk about today, recognitions of deeper realities. And before we're born physically, I believe that we are humanoid in shape, humanoid in form, human in attitude and ambition, if you like. Most souls on the astral plane, or in the spirit planes of this planet, are in human form. They may be more transparent, more radiant. Light will seem to pass through them. They'll be like, looking sort of more vague, more transparent, especially at a high vibratory level. And they will but they will still look human. Head, shoulders, arms, feet. The body gets refined through the planes, higher and higher level of vibration, sort of less dense, as I say, often more radiant, often very sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of thin and evanescent. And but in the the spirit planes where the majority of dead people exists. Not the lower, not the higher. This is the middle, where there's millions and millions of people. They're very human looking. There's not much difference. They're good looking. You know, everyone's sort of a nice round, not rounded, but sort of nice, pleasing shape. You know, average age looks about 30. You know, if you die young, you'll grow up till you're looking about 30, and if you die old, you'll slowly get younger, or you know, quickly get younger, and everyone kind of looks around that age. You know, physical peak, and you know, lots of good-looking people. As I say, because people learn to adjust their looks, you can do it with your thoughts. You don't figure it out right away, but it doesn't take that long. You'll get it. So again, a very human experience. Very same when you die. You just move on. You still look human for the vast majority of people. But that form, on a deeper level, is a convenient, comfortable illusion. We're not essentially humanoid. We're not essentially human. We are here on this planetary playground in the middle of a cycle of incarnations, learning, adapting, absorbing, recycling in terms of old experiences become new again because of, you know, karma, basically. We re-experience situations and people that either we feel that we didn't do well enough the first or the second or the third time, or we want to re-experience the situation from another angle. You can go through the same situations, human situations, that are either economic, religious, political, familial in nature, from a different angle. And as I think I used earlier, the metaphor, I used it somewhere, the judge, jury, witness, victim, accuser, you know, lawyer dramas. You can go through those situations and experience the same thing from every one of those players. And that's often what happens over a great number of lives. And the same situation with, you know, animals, landscapes. Your monad, your higher self, can project an energetic speck of itself into those forms, trees, rivers, fish, animals, you know, and experience that life, the life of that life form. And obviously, when you look at, say, things like trees and rivers and mountains, for example, they seem almost eternal in terms of, you know, they don't come and go like we do. They do come and go, but it takes many hundreds of years, many thousands of years. So those are temporary projections. You're not in them forever. You're in them until. And obviously, when I say you, that's a very loosey-goosey definition. But it does happen, and it is in your databanks, as I mentioned before. And if you care to look deeply enough or experience deeply enough, you will find that. And of course, you know, all this takes time, quote unquote, in our daily cycle, of which we have, you know, many responsibilities and schedules to follow within that daily cycle. And you may feel that, well, this is all very well. What he's saying and what he's talking about sounds good, but when am I going to have time to experience that? And I would urge you to be patient with yourself and allow that to unfold in its own, good time, as it were. It will unfold. It won't unfold if you don't want it to. If you inwardly put up a hand and say, don't want to, experience that. It's the same as all sorts of people, whether they're religious or materialist or, skeptical. They won't allow past life regression into their frame of reference. They just hold it up and will not think of it, despite it become, much more sort of popular than, say, certainly much more than 100 years ago, and even much more than 50 years ago, 40 years ago. And they just won't allow that. And so that if we use that as a metaphor, it continues on throughout life, the things that various souls and bodies will not allow themselves to experience. And you may be saying, well, when do they experience it? Well, they could come back another time. I can assure you that past life regression is going to be way more practiced and popular in, say, 100 years than it is now. It will infect other cultures greatly, or other worldviews, and I believe it will happen faster than we kind of New Agers looking at it and looking at society now and skepticism and religious belief, narrow religious belief and all that sort of thing. It'll happen faster. I think the whole, to use orbs, the whole experience of orbs, being caught on digital cameras and, that sort of thing, digital film. Digital film, that's maybe a contradiction in terms. That infected society quite quickly. I noticed that went around once it hits the major media, it moves around very fast. And although I can hear some of you saying, well, past life regression hit major media. You can see TV regressions up on YouTube that were done 30, 40 years ago on, television shows. And it hasn't maybe infected quite as fast as I'm hinting at, and it hasn't. But I noticed the whole orb thing sort of hit rather fast, and it went through society because of the internet mainly, and a little bit on television, quickly. And that's the metaphor I'm rather looking at right now, because of the internet and people's increasing use of it, always increasing. These ideas will spread rapidly, more rapidly as the years go by. And maybe they will just become fads, as we think of fads, not really instructional, educational, and not an expansion on a deeper spiritual level. That's possible, but I don't think so. They will be taken for granted, in the same way that people, my age or around my age, will look at young people and see how they take all sorts of things for granted that are like revolutions to us. Of course, digital media, the internet, instant communication or virtually instant communication, they take all that stuff for granted. Well, you and I are, if you're around my age, and yeah, I think you can probably guess what that is, we're still sort of wowing about it, And I know I do. You're talking to somebody casually, and they excuse themselves and say, I have to take this call. You're standing on the sidewalk, maybe on a nice summer's day, and then you realize they're talking to somebody. I'm in North America here. You're talking to somebody in Europe. And often, I have had this happen a few times. It's a spouse or a family member who's just arrived at an airport somewhere, in continental Europe. Time zones are different, of course. And they're just calling to say, I got here safely, and I'll talk to you later. That's kind of all they're saying. But you're standing next to a fellow who's talking to the spouse who's in Europe and has just landed. And you're thinking how amazingly revolutionary that is to the world that you grew up in. And yet, young people, 30 and under or whatever, they take that sort of thing for granted. Well, anyway, the whole, all these other things that I'm discussing, the next generation will take all that sort of thing, a lot of it for granted, a lot of it. And I include all the sort of cultural blending that we're experiencing, certain in large urban areas here in North America and in Europe, where there's every kind of culture you can imagine blending together in, urban atmospheres. And I've long since stopped trying to enumerate the number of cultures that are represented here in the Greater Toronto area where I live. It's as I've joked before, it's like the United Nations here. It really is. And this, as I say, this trend will continue. There's nothing that really will stop it. I mean, of course, there are countries that are hermetic and, keep them to themselves. We don't know how long that'll work. I mean, how long can North Korea keep North Koreans imprisoned in North Korea? It'd be interesting to see. I can't think it'd be that much longer, but I could be wrong. It may be a little sticky on that one. But certainly in the last 30 years, we see a lot more just, vacation travel by cultures all over the world. Often young people, but not always. Just going places and experiencing and having fun and, working a little bit, make some money. And they're absorbing other cultures as they do that in a way that didn't really happen when I was young. It happened a very, very little, but travel was much more expensive then. And it just didn't happen quite as much. But it's certainly happening now, and I think it will just continue. The races and ethnicities will mix. And if you didn't approve of it, you would say, oh, they're mixing quite promiscuously. But I think that's a good thing. That kind of promiscuity breeds acceptance and understanding more than any other interaction, I think. And as we move toward, this, the brotherhood of man, the sense that all sentient beings live on a level playing field, as we move toward these concepts and experiences, such things are, steps along the way. And it's the same with, the out-of-body travel that, you're going to say, well, when's he getting to that? It's the same issue comes into play. Your definitions become deeper and wider of yourself and others, but your acceptance of the blending with others, when one is in a state of ignorance or bound by outdated belief systems and inadequate information, as religious people and conventionally religious people and conventionally materialist, skeptical material people are, they don't really have a clue about what's going on in the afterlife and who's there and what they're doing and why they're there, and in the way that people like us pursuing this exploration together, and people who read books by mediums, people who read books on, as I say, if they just, even if they're just reading on it, they're having their definitions expanded. People that reading the UFO alien literature, all that stuff that the mainstream won't touch, those of our, we're already on that path. But the acceptance of those in the afterlife and the wide variety of those in the afterlife isn't understood by conventionally religious or conventionally materialist people. They live in a state of ignorance, a deep state of ignorance. And as we spearhead this exploration, which will eventually change humanity quite radically, we are showing them how to see the dead as equals. They're not a special category of human being, the dead. They are just us farther along. Yeah, they're dead, and yes, they're in their astral bodies. But that only seems like a huge leap when you're ignorant of it, when you're insufficiently informed of what happens and what's going on. When you explore it in any kind of a fashion, really, I'm not going to define how one explores it, because you can do it in a sort of serious, um, focused way, or you can sort of play with it, you know. And when you read about, well, I've read accounts of people who say they've been, doing something that's like out of body travel since they were kids, but didn't realize it. You know, there are early accounts of what they remember when they did, were 4 and 5 and 6 went out of body. They're playful. They're not a focused study. There's just kids playing, but they've got that consciousness out of body, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. So there are many ways to approach this exploration, but the new definitions, the new understandings, are important advances as well. To overcome, and again with religious and materialist people, their fear of the dead, and that goes anywhere from not wanting to talk to psychics and mediums because they think they're going to be infected, that death is a virus, and if they as a medium, I experience this quite a lot. On a general level, not with people that study with me or come to me as clients, but just casual conversation. You can see and feel that they think death is a virus, and they're going to catch it if they talk to me for more than 5 minutes or whatever. And that's your basic fear. And they have to overcome that. And a lot of people have a great difficulty overcoming that. And as I say, I can tell from my day-to-day experience in life. There's quite a number of people that I know, on acquaintances rather than good friends, who are definitely ill at ease talking about this stuff. They'll be polite and ask me what I've been up to, that sort of thing. But you can see they don't want me to talk about it too much, and they might ask a casual question. Well, what do you think happened to my mother when she died? And they won't ask for a spirit contact or anything. They just sort of want some vague reassurance that the mother's okay, right? But they don't really want to get into it in detail because they're afraid. And that fear has to be overcome. And it's very similar to the fear of other races that was standard issue 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, and is still around, obviously, but less and less so, where the races have blended and are living together. I could think of all sorts of people, I don't mean friends of mine, just people around in society, from what you read, who would be sort of a little touchy and afraid of Muslims, especially traditional Muslims. And in the field I'm in, working, the job I'm in, and because it's in a larger urban atmosphere, we now have many Muslims working in our company, and I relate to them all the time. I mean, not just other all sorts of people, but plenty of Muslims, not just 1, 2, or 3, lots. And obviously you're working, you're not socializing all the time, but when you do get a chance, you just sort of see their lives are not that much different from ours. Ours meaning, white, Caucasian, yada, yada, yada. They have all the same challenges that we do. And I'm not a religious person. These people often are. They face the strictures and challenges of their religion and the rules and regulations. So they're more like, active Christians that I would know rather than me, because I don't follow any of that sort of thing. I don't allow people to tell me what to eat or what to think or what to do. I'm a free spirit. Yeah, I make that decision for myself, and as I'm sure a lot of you do too. But you see comparisons all over. But anyway, that almost daily contact I have with fairly traditional Muslims. I mean, the women dress in a fairly traditional manner, not completely 100%, but they are wearing traditional dress, and you can see that they lead their lives in a fairly traditional way, not 100% by any means. But that contact makes me see that they're just people with a slightly different belief system, and so I relate to them in the same way that I relate to you know traditional church-going Christians who I run into all the time, and see despite their belief system, which is quite different than mine, we are equals. We are all part of the brotherhood of man. We're all sons of God. We're all uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, I was going to say obedient citizens of the country. Obedience a little, you know, a little sort of scared to do anything else, compliant, and we seek to contribute to society, the smooth flowing of society, by generally obeying the guidelines that are set out for us. We don't start fights in the street. We don't, throw things across it, strangers across the street. Just, we behave. We like the smooth running of society. We like to be polite. We like to be considerate. We're all most like 99% of people are like that, and so those values are continued across cultures. But anyway, I'm sort of trying to make a comparison between other cultures that we blend with in our day-to-day urban lives, and I realize people rurally and in small towns, you don't have that experience, not nearly so much. I recognize that. But it's the same as, it's a very similar experience to reaching out to the dead and blending and mixing with them, of which I encourage you all to do. And even if you do it a little bit now, do it more. Sit down and meditate and talk to those that you know who are dead. Obviously, you're probably going to do it if it's a spouse that's passed on, maybe a mother or a father. You're probably going to try that out, and maybe not talk about it to anybody. But I urge you to do it, and do it on a fairly casual basis. You don't have to turn it into this ritual. Although obviously, to do a meditation and to get into a quiet, focused state is a bit of a ritual. But try to normalize it, as I used to joke years ago about my spirit contacts, trying to normalize relations between the planes. Well, yes, I was joking, but at the same time, I'm quite serious. This is what we're trying to do. So that, for example, long distance phone calls when I was a boy, I'm 65 now, when I was 10, 8, were very expensive and not very common. In fact, where I grew up in Scotland, a lot of people didn't have phones. They would use the call box on the corner. We did, that without getting into a big hoopla about why we did. We just did. And but long distance calls were a big deal. I think you had to book them. You had to like phone up and reserve one and then do it later. And it didn't happen very often at all. But look how common it is now. People do it all the time. And they don't think twice about it. Well, they might think, oh yeah, this one's going to cost a fair bit because I'm talking to Australia and we're on, whatever. But generally, people don't think about it. And I would like communication, and I think it will happen, whether I want it to happen or not. I'm part of a wave here. I'm not just one guy. We want that to come about so that talking to the dead is as common as making long distance phone calls is, without thinking. Obviously, there's a lot to overcome when you do this. There's your own doubts. Am I talking to who I think I'm talking to? Am I going crazy? You have to overcome all that stuff. But that's part of the game. That's part of what you have to do. So obviously, in doing so, you're expanding your definition of who you are and who they are. And that may seem obvious, but it's important, I believe, in our consciousness expansion to fully understand that we are alive when we're alive and when we're dead. There's no difference. There's very, very little difference. Not nearly as much as you might think. Obviously, there's greater freedom on the astral plane. We know that there's all sorts of things you can do. You can alter your appearance with your thought. You can fly. You can move instantaneously from one part of the astral plane to the other, or virtually, like a second. And you want to go from astral plane Paris to astral plane Los Angeles, you can do it. And once you're practiced, you can sort of fly there and sort of whiz in a few seconds, or you can do the instantaneous transfer. I've done it plenty of times. You can do it too. You probably experienced something similar in dreams and wonder if that's really real, and it is real, and it does happen, and it happens all the time. So anyway, new definitions of who you are and what you can do. I'm a person that, I'm not just a human now that I'm alive. I'm still a human, completely human when I'm dead. And I'm still completely and utterly human when I do an instantaneous thought transfer that moves me several thousand miles in a second. Now, to go beyond that, of course, and you probably sense I was going to go beyond that, is to understand that prior to incarnating and as who you are now, and after your incarnation as the personality character that you are now is over, and I don't just mean the physical incarnation, I mean the spiritual incarnation. You die, you go into the spirit world, you have your experiences that you didn't have here, let's say, lots of them, because of finances, because of being held down by jobs and commitments and you get to do all that stuff on the astral plane. You fulfill all your ambitions that you couldn't fulfill here. It's really the second half of your life. This is just the first half. When you die and you're still the same man or woman, you can go on and fulfill all your curiosities and interests and desires and ambitions. And then, and take however long you wish to do it. I'm not suggesting you do it in a week or a month. However long, years, decades, whatever, doesn't matter. And when you're completely fulfilled as person A or person B, then you sort of drift out of incarnation. You move into an energy form in the energy planes and rejoin your monad as an energy form. And it's sort of like the hotel at the end of the rainbow, the monad, the higher self. So, but within that large span there, you're human the whole way, living, dead, and so is everyone else. And so that in itself is a deepening of definition, and much more so than the average person would have now. But to understand that you're still an eternal spirit, even when you don't have a recognizable human form, is an even deeper understanding. When we say that we are eternal spirits, that's what I'm implying anyway, that beyond the human form, both before and after taking on a human form, to be a person, to be a character, to be a personality within a family, within a culture, within a set time frame, is a temporary redefinition of your human spirits. Or should I say spirits, not human spirit. You move into being human, and we have a sort of greater commitment to the planet that you will understand. Well, you may understand it now. Um, we have many lives as humans in, you know, different situations, different cultures, different genders, different religions, different periods in history. And that's our commitment, thousands of years commitment to being human. And as I understand it, it's a commitment that our monads, our higher selves, made when the planet was young, when it was being formed, and you couldn't actually live on it. If you've seen any TV shows about how the the physical plane was virtually uninhabitable in the early days, too hot, too cold, too many volcanoes, too many storms, not enough stuff growing here, etc., etc. We waited for for the time to be right before we could incarnate. But it was a new planet was created, however many tens of hundreds of thousands of years ago, and the invitation went out, and our monads existed on other places, other planetary systems. I believe without without a shred of proof. You can't prove this stuff. I believe that my monad was incarnate on the Sirius B, and other people think Andromeda. Other people, a lot of New Agers have their feelings about where they're from. None of us can prove it. Doesn't really matter. Who cares? The people that are religious and materialist, they can't prove anything either. They just like to think they can. They'll wave the Bible in your face, or they'll wave, a bunch of signs in your face. It's not proof. It's just another set of belief systems. Anyway, it doesn't. None of that matters. But that's what I believe, and you can either choose to be interested in what I say or reject it. It doesn't matter to me. Monads were invited. They needed monads to populate this new planet and experience the sort of paradigm that was being set up, the density levels, the insistence on complete free will, which we still live by. You can do anything you want. You can be the worst asshole going. You get to do it. You can be the great destroyer, the great ruthless destroyer. And let's not even talk about current examples. Let's talk about Alexander the Great. Check that guy out. See how much he destroyed, and died when he was 33 or something. Yeah, a real go, and it makes the modern stuff look pretty, tame. And I just give that example out because people will often, they'll do the usual Stalin, Hitler, Pol Pot kind of stuff, and just think about Alexander the Great for a minute. But the complete free will to do as you wish. That was one of the ground rules of this planet and still is. That didn't exist elsewhere. Not nearly as much. And the density of the vibration, we physical plane, especially when we started out, was a much denser, lower vibration. And you couldn't really contact your own inner divinity. It was just impossible. You were too far down, down the ladder of vibrations, and just couldn't, you completely forgot who you were, your origins, in a way that a lot of us don't forget. Now, we remember bits and bobs, and not the whole thing, but so we had to work our way up to where we're at now. And initially, there was completely immersed in these very low vibrations, fighting predators day to day, not much fun. Recreation activities, well, forget it. You're just learning to live from moment to moment. But anyway, that's the early days on the planet, and that's how we started out. And so from that, we were invited to that, with a little telepathic signing out. So we've evolved from that, and certainly our definitions of who we were, and that would even be before, communicable language, I would think, would be pretty thin, and it wouldn't have much understanding. And I should mention that before that happened, there's the myth of Lemuria that you can check out, and I believe that our incarnation in Lemuria was an early version of our astral plane. We lived in a paradise world. You'll see legends of this cropping up all over the place if you care to look for it. And basically, we were living on the astral plane the Earth astral plane to get used to the planet. And it was an easy step at first because it was like the astral plane, and we could do all the sort of things that you're familiar with now, and be in human form and learn the life of that form on the astral plane before descending. Well, we were kind of waiting for the the physical plane to be ready, and we were on Lemuria as astral beings for quite a while before, and not the notion of time and quite a while really mattered then. Um, and then we descended to the lower, the next level when it was ready for us. And it was a rough go, as I'm sure you can imagine. And but again, that's all. During all of that, we were human, humanoid, human fears, doubts, ambitions, etc., etc. And so you can embrace that and enlarge your definitions there too. And so, normalizing relations with who we were and who we will be um, as we, move forward through time. What we're doing now, this normalizing relations, as I'm calling it, and I would again urge you to do it any chance you get. Telepathic contact with the dead is easier than you think, not harder. As we build that rainbow bridge to the other planes, understand that the bridges that we build now will have much more heavy traffic on them the next time we come back to physical incarnation. We're building that bridge now so that we can use it later, so that everyone can use it later. So that in the same way that long distance phone calls were a rarity when I was a kid and are extremely common now, and everyone's, many people have phones and, call friends 100 miles away without even thinking about it. And it would be the same. The next generation, and then obviously we're not the next generation unless you come back in a real hurry, which I urge you not to do. Take your time on the astral plane and think it through. They will take all that stuff for granted because we've built that bridge. And they're on it, and they don't think about it that much. I hear women often discussing, how younger women take, at least in the West here, obviously this doesn't apply around the world, the things that feminists fought for in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Younger women take that for granted. They barely think about it. And I think that some of the older feminists are a little irked about that. But when you're part of a vanguard, that's what you do. You build the bridge so that others can walk across it. And I think we all have to accept that. I mean, for example, I was part of a bridge when I was a young man. Very few people had long hair. Anybody can do it now. And lots of people choose not to. I see lots of young men with very short hair. But I'm just saying, I was part of that vanguard. I endured the jeers and the mockery and the insult, as did others, not just me. And in around 1970, 71, when it was, obviously we were part of a vanguard. Then we built that bridge so that it was okay for men to have long hair, and it was accepted. It's just all about bridge building, really. And so we're doing this, understand that we're doing this for the next generation and ourselves when we come back. Because all this stuff that we kind of struggle with now and discuss and talk about our shortcomings and our inability to do this and our inability to do that. And I get lots of emails from people where they will say, well, Lord, I just can't seem to do what you think is natural. And I just urge them to you keep trying and don't beat themselves up over it. It will come to you. So these deeper definitions, I urge you to pursue them consciously and embrace them completely. That we are eternal spirits. We are not, people that are aging, people that are getting weaker, people that are getting more susceptible to illness as we get older, all that sort of a thing. We are not what we appear to be. We are eternal spirits undergoing a physical incarnation on a certain planet for certain experiential knowledge, which we will then take with us as we move on to something else. And the dead are doing the same thing. They're just at the next stage on the journey, as you and I will be in the not too distant future. And understand that, even if you're not experiencing it very much, try to understand it and embrace it in your thoughts, because that is part of it. That is part of the whole experience, is to embrace it in your mind as well as your experience. And the brotherhood of all sentient beings is a wonderful concept. But just remember, as well as animals, devas, fairies, fish, the human dead are sentient beings too. Let us embrace them fully. Let us not be afraid of them. Let us not shy away from being part of their brotherhood. We can do it. And we will do it. And for the moment, I wish you well on that particular journey.